We're live.
Yeah, that's fine.
We're live.
Very good.
Well, welcome back, everyone, and welcome back to the Spirit of Yorkshire Day celebrations. We're going to taste the Yorkshire Day once again in a little while with the two founders that I'm delighted to say we have with us. Tom Mellor and David Thompson have both joined me. Welcome, gents, to your own distillery.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah. And congratulations on building a fine distillery and making great whiskey.
Thank you.
But we're here to talk for this session primarily about the fact that you guys do things quite differently in terms of the bar. It's about making whiskey and making it. It was about. But I think what might be quite for everyone at home is to first of all understand how you guys met and how all this came to be about.
Yeah.
I don't know which.
You want to start?
Who'd like to start?
Well, I don't know where to start, Dave. I'm not quite sure. I suppose in the first instance, David and I met when David was a fresh-faced, new arable sales specialist. Back in the mid-1980s, breaking into this area, working for a company called Cargills, and he came onto my farm wanting to buy grain, wanting to sell me agrochemicals and fertilizer and things, and we basically did some business in the mid to late 80s, and our friendship sort of grew from there. We then started playing rugby together in the 1990s, and our families have grown up. I think we introduced our wives to each other, and they didn't really stop talking ever. And now the kids are all grown up, and David and I are working together pretty well full time on the Spirit of Yorkshire.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say as well. I mean, I came from an agricultural background, so I spent a lot of time. Not just farming, but also at college as well, learning the trade. So and obviously there's a big trade out there in terms of buying good quality malting barley, and not a lot of people probably realise, but Yorkshire, and particularly Yorkshire Wolds, is an incredible area to grow some really high quality malting barley, of which most of it would have gone up to Scotland, 10 years ago, 15 years ago.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think it's fair to say what we've done is really cut out the middleman.
Yeah.
And instead of sending it off to Muntons to then malt it, to then send it up to Scotland to then make excellent whiskey, we thought we might have a go and reduce some food miles.
So were you both kind of whiskey lovers when you came together, or is that sort of developed?
Well, I mean, as far as we were concerned, I mean, just after Beck and I got married, we went up to Scotland for us to almost a belated honeymoon, and we bought a bottle of I can't actually remember what it was now, and I wish I did. I wish I'd kept that bottle, but it was a new distillery at the time, and we were just wanting to investigate new whiskies, and Beck particularly was into Islay. She loved the smoky whiskies, and she still does to this day. But so yeah, I guess we've always liked whiskies. We knew nothing about them, how to make them. It was completely off the agenda then. But we've always been sort of exploring sort of different flavours of whiskies from around.
You always liked whiskey.
The world. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I don't know about Tom.
No. I'm not a big whiskey drinker. I'm a very precise whiskey drinker, if you like. I don't drink very much, but I do like to understand the nuances, and I'm learning very quickly about the different balances and the different flavors and the different the different characteristics that both the barley and the casks will impart into the finished product. I'm learning very quickly. But prior to this, I was not a massive whiskey drinker.
Yeah, well, that's interesting. So maybe, Tom, if you could maybe give us a little bit of a feel for the history of the farm itself, that would be great.
Okay, my grandfather bought the farm at the end of the Second World War in 1945. Brought the family over from industrial West Yorkshire. He farmed it until 1959. My dad took over from him, and then in the 1980s, I gradually took over from my dad. So I'm a third generation farmer. But throughout all of that, it's a traditional Yorkshire Wolds arable farm growing barley, oilseed rape, wheat. What else do we grow? We grow potatoes, beans, legumes, all sorts of things like that. A lot of grassland too, and it's fairly, it is traditional. About 600 acres, but we specialise because of the soil type in malting barley, which is very obviously clearly important to us.
And so this barley previously, most of it would have actually been malted, as you say, by Muntons and then sent to Scotland to Scotch single malt distilleries.
Well, it would have been. We started the idea of using our own barley came back. You've got to rewind probably nearly 20 years to 2002 when we set up the Waltop Brewery. That was the initial thing when farms were starting to look for areas of diversification to move the businesses in different directions. We were no different, and I looked at the resources that we had on the farm and didn't fancy converting buildings into holiday cottages or anything like that, and setting up a farm shop. We're at the end of a long road. That wouldn't have worked. But I put the two and two together, and we have our own water supply. And in fact, actually, we don't have mains water on the farm. We still rely on borehole, which is effectively, well, the original borehole was sunk in 1937, and we're still using that one, although we have a second borehole now. That water just comes straight from the chalk aquifers below the farm. So put the two and two together, the malting barley and the water, and came up with the idea of brewing beer. So that was it. My idea was to then add value to the barley that we were growing on the farm, and everything has grown since then. And then when we got a little bit further down the line in around 2012-13, it seemed a logical progression. Once I'd sort of discovered that actually making the first part of making whiskey or malt whiskey and the first part of making brewing were absolutely identical in terms of extracting and the sugar from the barley and then converting that into alcohol. Then obviously little sparks started to arise in my head, and I thought, well, there's maybe an opportunity here. And that's when I got in touch with David, and we then sort of hatched a little plan, and
here we are today.
And here we are today, exactly.
Yeah. But it's fascinating because that sounds like the very traditional Scottish model. You know, when back in the day when breweries were prevalent, and it was really just a way of using up additional barley and then making the whiskey from that, making that leap from brewing to distilling, which seems quite obvious to me, but maybe not to everyone.
I was quite surprised that nobody else was doing it, especially not in Yorkshire, and that gave us a sort of once we had then investigated why that was, there was no reason we couldn't. Neither David and I could find a reason why we couldn't do that. Yeah, and then it was, and we'll probably talk about this later on or in a different session, when we got in touch with Jim Swan, and then basically he took us through that and handheld us through the initial stages and set us on our way, really.
Yeah, well, that's brilliant. Yeah, we're going to talk about Jim Swan in the session, the next session, I think, actually. Who was obviously a big influence and help. But just going back to the expression "field to bottle," what does that mean to you guys? I mean, why do you do it, and what does it involve?
Yeah, I think for us, there's a lot of people talk about grain to glass. Well, actually, all whiskey is grain to glass, but it's where you get the grain from, which for us is really, really important. And with our sort of knowledge of how to grow barley, it's much easier for us to be able to control how we grow that crop. When it's planted, what variety we choose, what characteristics we're looking for, and how we deal with the soil and how we plant the seed. So, I mean, that's something we're definitely in control of. And Tom's done a lot over the last sort of couple of seasons to start to really look at how we do that in more detail for lots of good reasons.
I think that's right. The idea that we call ourselves field to bottle means that we have complete control over all the growing process. It's not just, we don't just sell the barley we don't just buy malt from a maltster and leave him to do the work in terms of finding out where the barley came from and making sure it's the right quality and stuff. We actually do that right the way through. So as David says and alluded to, we have complete control over the whole process. So we can determine what cultivation methods we use, what varieties we grow, when we plant it, when it's the right time to plant it, the previous cropping, what the future's cropping is going to be when we harvest it, how we harvest it as well. Very easy to grow a cracking crop of malting barley and then destroy the husk by not having the combine settings correctly. And so there's all those little things. So we're monitoring that constantly to make sure that what's going into our beer and whiskey, is absolutely of the best quality, and making sure that we've complete control over all the processes.
It's fascinating. How much barley would you grow in a year?
Great question. We grow around about 600 tons, 600 to 700 tons, which effectively is about 250 acres. Spring barleys tend to yield a little bit less than the winter barley varieties, although we've grown some winter barley this year for the very first time. There's a new variety called SY Vessel, which is new onto the scene, and we've been experimenting with that. So that's another thing that we can do. You know, we're quite nimble, and we can actually make a decision very, very quickly without having to go through tiers of middle management to try and get it all signed off. David and I can sit in the office and with a
or beer.
We don't drink during the day.
No, we don't. Only on a Saturday.
So we just have to win a cup of coffee, and we can actually make it. David and Joe can ask me a question, like they did a couple of years ago, by saying that, you know, is there any chance we could grow some rye? And so I said, well, yeah, we'll put that on. And so I investigated that. We then the following year grew a crop of rye. Then got hold of Muntons. They malted a proportion of that for us. We got it straight back again. It's all ring fenced through Muntons, so we know that whatever we send them and that they process, we get back again, which to us is absolutely critical. And we did that, and so we went through the whole of that process. And then it's fair to say had a few issues with the making it into a mash. Yes. But once we'd done that, and we'd actually worked a system around, again, by being flexible and not just throwing loads of money at it by buying fancy bits of new kit, we were able to actually go through that process and have complete control. So as far as the barley is concerned, you know, if we want to use a different variety of barley from a whiskey point of view, then we can do that. And agronomically, we would then work. Most farmers will grow the barley and then expect somebody to buy it because they've been told to grow that particular variety. We can actually choose that, and we can dictate that ourselves. So we're not. So again, that sets us apart from other people, and enables us to have a degree of flexibility and nimbleness that many people don't have.
And controlling your own destiny,
absolutely.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, it's a very top-down approach. You know, it's kind of really drilling into to what is the most important ingredient, the barley, and considering all elements of it and controlling all elements of it. It's really very fascinating. Oh, we've got a question coming in.
Okay.
Are you kidding me?
I'll do this one.
Oh, can you hear this?
So yeah, it's a question about direct drilling, and not ploughing. So basically, I mean, Tom can go into more detail about this, but fundamentally, every crop you harvest, you plough after before you put the next crop in. We have trialled direct drilling, which takes out the ploughing stage, which has huge benefits, not just for the soil, but also for the environment, Tom. So
the idea, yes, I mean, traditionally people to create a nice even seed bed in which to plant a brand new crop. When ploughing first came along, they basically ploughed about 1.5 inches deep, and that was effectively just turning over the topsoil and leaving the substructure completely untouched. As machines got bigger, ploughs got heavier, and tractors got more sophisticated, people have ended up going deeper, you know, because otherwise you get very difficult to put a heavy machine on there without actually creating some sort of a plough pan. It's called a plough pan, where you get a solid layer of soil or clay, if you will, which roots can't get through. So you have to break that up. So once you break that up, then you've got to you have to plough that in as well and smooth it down. So effectively, what's happened is that over the years, we've just got deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. Every year, therefore, that means that the huge amount of soil is turned over. And every time you turn the soil over, you clearly oxidize it and aerate it. And you get some mineralization of carbon, which actually then goes off into the atmosphere. So it's already locked up in the soil and then goes off into the atmosphere, which in today's society, the way that we think about carbon footprint now and trying to reduce the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere is not good. And secondly, you also get some mineralization and some conversion of soil nitrogen, which is locked up. which then actually would then be used by a plant root if it was there. But quite often, it then just actually gets washed through the soil into the water supply, into the groundwater supply. So you have carbon going north and you have nitrates going south. It's a very simplistic way of doing it, and there is a whole load of a raft of other chemical reactions going on. But effectively, that's the top and bottom of it. Now, if you don't invert the soil, then you reduce that, by a massive amount. In fact, you almost reduce it to nothing.
Right.
So then the idea would be then to then drill into the soil without disturbing the soil. Of course, that brings itself problems, because if the soil structure is not correct and your earthworm population is not correct, you don't have the right aeration, and you may get waterlogged soils and very sad soils. You may get really hard soils as well, which then dry out and the roots can't get through them. So you have to do something to make sure that your soils are in good condition. You have to encourage earthworm populations. And what we've been doing over the last few years is actually in between the barley crops. Because spring barley is only grown for about 16 weeks of the year, you plant it in late February, early March, if you're lucky, and you harvest it in August, maybe into September if you're unlucky. Then the rest of the year, right through the autumn and the winter into the early part of the spring, there's nothing growing in the field. So what we've now done, and what people have been experimenting with over the last few years, and we've done a lot of work on this ourselves, is to actually grow what's called a cover crop. And that cover crop can be a mixture of different things, but essentially you would put together a cereal crop which would then grow and produce a large root ball, a legume, a crop which would bring nitrogen in from the atmosphere, a brassica with a long taproot to break open the soil, and then some other bits and pieces to go in there just to provide some more green.
So we're
matter.
effectively letting nature do the job of the plough.
Correct. So basically, there's a few buzz expressions going through the agricultural world as well. You know, your plant's not metal to open your soil up and all that sort of thing. And actually, it is working. And monitoring earthworm populations is quite, it's quite important as well to make sure that you've got the right number. So if you go around and you do a little dig,
You have to catch them.
you go around and do a little 20 centimeter. So if you take an 8-inch spade, a 20 centimeter spade, and you take a block out like that and you count the worms, if you've got 16 worms in there, it's perfect, because that equates to 4 million worms per hectare, and that's the sort of considered to be the optimum for breaking
That's a lot
things
of
down.
worms.
You then got to look at you've got to look at other things as well. You've got to look at the incorporating, or what do you do with the residue from the previous crop. So clearly we take the barley grains off, and that's what we want to do. But what do you do with the straw? So traditionally, a lot of people have baled it and then taken it away, used it for bedding during the winter time, and then respread it onto the land in the spring, as farmyard manure and with all the associated nutrients and benefits that confers. But actually, when you start to really analyse the carbon footprint of all of that, there are some serious questions to be asked about that traditional way of doing things, because the diesel, the damage to the soil structure that can be done by the big balers and actually leading the straw off, especially if it's in a wet season, you can really wreck the soil structure. So you can just about undo all the good that you've been doing in other ways. So what we do is we don't do any of that. We just chop the straw, and then over a period of time, the bugs, the microbes in the soil build up in terms of numbers. Your earthworms build up in terms of numbers, and you get an amount of the right balance of nutrients in the soil to break the straw down very quickly. And and you have to talk about things like the carbon nitrogen ratio as well. So if you have a high amount of carbon, which is in your straw, and a low amount of nitrogen, it takes a long time for the straw to break down. So what you try to do is encourage the earthworm population and the nutrients in the soil by previous cropping to get that balance down, so that the ratio of the two is more even.
So how pleased you asked that question?
That wasn't my question.
Whose question was it? That was somebody else's question.
So-
Thanks for the question.
Thanks for that.
Apologies if I've gone on
Well,
for a bit.
no, it's completely fascinating. But to be honest, there's a question on everybody's lips, which is much more far-reaching, which is
Okay.
and more important really is how many bottles per acre.
Okay, I have just done some. We just
Can I have the short answer, please?
no. How many bottles per acre? What did I say?
We've got a couple of minutes left, so
How many bottles?
not to put you any pressure.
3,000.
Yeah, about 3,500 bottles per acre.
3,500.
Yeah. And there will in that bottle there will be 19,500 grains of barley.
Wow,
We've counted everyone.
We've counted
That's
everyone,
absolutely.
You've just shoved some barley in the bottom.
It's like that game, you know, how many Smarties in the cheese.
Oh, brilliant. And what about, well, first of all, should we
just
Should we
have
go?
another go?
enjoy it? So this is
I'm a
the
bit thirsty now after all.
surprise. So this is your Yorkshire Day expression, which we have tried earlier, but happy
absolutely.
to try again.
Yeah, well, it sort of grows on you, doesn't it? I mean, the bottling strength as well. But I don't know if we talked about that in previous sessions, but
Yes.
this really holds well at 55%. So it's not quite cask strength, but the sherry side of it really holds that extra alcohol very well, I think.
But how does it feel pouring a bottle whiskey from that bottle? The journey that you've been on together. How satisfying is it to then be able to share a dram of
How long have we got for this?
Short or long?
David.
All right.
I'll be short.
It's just brilliant. I mean, we never ever 5-6 years ago thought we were in this position where we'd be sitting here with you, Superstar, Mr. Whiskey Man, and drinking sort of our hard labours, really. I mean,
exactly.
it was a risk. We took a risk. We've put everything into this, and to get something out that is as dare I say, as good as this. We couldn't have wished for anything better.
No, exactly. I assume you feel the same, Tom.
Seconded.
Yeah.
That's a short version.
Joe learned that one. Well, I think that's about us for this session. It's been really fast. I mean, to be honest, I think we could have done this for an hour or two.
It's a big subject.
Massive.
Really
There's
is.
lots and lots of stuff.
Well, hopefully we can do it again.
Yeah,
but
love to. Yeah,
have a bit more of your time, Tom and David.
Yeah.
But thanks, guys, and thanks for having us, and thanks everyone at home. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you're enjoying the tasting as well. And we'll see you in the next session. We've got the Jim Swan effect, and in about 5 or 10 minutes,
brilliant.
I think. And
looking forward to
we've got some special guests for that as well. So thank you, and cheers, guys.
Cheers.
Cheers.